Good morning. Welcome to yet another fantastic Ubben lecture. I'm Brent St. John, president of the DePauw University Alumni Association, and I welcome you to what should be a great presentation and great morning. On behalf of the board of directors and staff partners alumni engagement, thank you for coming to Old Gold. Our attendance is fantastic this year, over 400 alumni. I believe it's the greatest participation in Old Gold we've had since Dr. Casey was inaugurated. And I think with the events later today and so forth, you'll have a great time today. The Alumni Association Board of Directors met the last few days, and our focus has been how to connect alums to DePauw, more and more specifically to students. And Bret got a chance to meet students this morning, later today, and just getting alums back to campus to meet students. And I think it's a really good two-way street. On the way out, you'll have an opportunity. There's a few tables outside where you can check out how to host an intern, both winter term and also now summer, and also recommend a student you may know in your area. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Jeff McCall, Professor of Communications, to the podium. He will introduce Bret and our Timothy and Sharon Ubben lecture speaker.
Good morning. As an alumnus and a member of the DePauw faculty, it gives me great pride to present the 2013 Distinguished Alumni Achievement Award in Media. Bret Baier is the anchor of Fox News Channel's Special Report with Bret Baier, which is among cable news's highest rated shows. Bret has had a remarkable career trajectory. He started out working in local television, so he has an appreciation for a news agenda outside the Beltway. He joined Fox News early in its history and has been part of every major news development ever since. At Fox News, Bret has served as Atlanta Bureau Correspondent, National Security Correspondent, and Chief White House Correspondent. Bret clearly brings the experience of a real journalist to his anchor chair. Bret is keeping alive DePauw's impressive tradition of producing outstanding journalists. Legendary journalists like Eugene Pulliam, Casey Hogate, and Barney Kilgore helped get that tradition going. John McWethy was a stellar correspondent at ABC for many years. Bob Steele was the director of the Poynter Institute for Journalism. And that tradition is carried on today by outstanding journalists like Rob Johnson at CBS 2 in Chicago, Dick Johnson at Channel 5 in Chicago, Steve Hayes at the Weekly Standard and at Fox News, and Aaron Lucetti at the Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. So please now join me in welcoming the recipient of DePauw University's 2013 Distinguished Alumni Achievement Award for Media, Fox News Channel's Bret Baier.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, back at DePauw. Looks a lot different than I remember it. Had a lot of fun this morning talking to some golf team members, some old buddies on the golf team here in the front row, and reliving some stories. I'm going to go over to Sigma Chi. I was a Sigma Chi here. There's some Sigs here? There's some Sigma Chi's here? This is early for you guys. Holy cow, 10 o'clock? It's pretty good. I was talking to President Casey last night, and who is a fantastic person and has done a lot for this school. He said he likes Sigma Chi, and you know Sigma Chi is right next to the administration building. He said he has a problem with Sigma Chi, and that is their music. And I said, oh, really? Is it loud? And he said, no, it stinks. He said, they always play Come On Eileen. Come On Eileen? Guys, I didn't even play Come On Eileen. So he said he went over there with a a DVD or a CD or something. He had a mix that he could give them so that they'd have some better music to play, at least, if it was going to interrupt his work. It is a great pleasure to be back here in that I also received this today. This is a shot of me as the first anchor of the television show Evening Edition here at DePauw when the Media Center started. My co-anchor, Vicki Duncan. It is very funny to see this picture because I was just going through my stuff at home. We're in the middle of a move in a little bit, and I found a tape, and I put it in, and it was horrific. It was truly awful. But it was a start, and that is where I got my start, and I owe a lot to DePauw for who I am today. I thought I'd give you a brief history about what happened after I left DePauw, and we're obviously going to have a conversation about a lot of things, hopefully not too tough from Jeff. But when I left DePauw, I interned, actually during DePauw, junior year, I spent a semester, the Washington semester at American University. I interned at CNN for Bernie Shaw, the anchor of CNN, right before he left for Iraq, when he was over there talking about the bombs falling in Baghdad, the first Gulf War. I wrote a little bit for this show, Inside Politics. Basically what I wrote was, "Welcome to Inside Politics, I'm Bernard Shaw." That's about it. I also ran the teleprompter a little bit, and I brought Bernie Shaw his popcorn. He loved popcorn during the commercial breaks. Now, as an anchor now, that's an interesting choice because, you know, the kernels, there's a lot of... But he did. And I recently saw Bernie Shaw about a couple years ago and at a charity event in D.C., and I said, you know, Bernie, I used to intern for you long, long ago, and I brought you your popcorn at the break, and he just paused and said, in his deep voice, he said, "Who brings you your popcorn now?" I don't have any popcorn, but maybe I should. I went from there to WJWJ, a little station in Beaufort, South Carolina. I was the Hilton Head guy. I covered huge stories like loggerhead sea turtle nesting, what color the azaleas were going to be in the median, like big battles with the town council. I loved it. I was making $15,000 a year. I was working as a waiter and bartender at Applebee's and delivering food at the same time. So I would do the show on tape, and then I would go to my job delivering food. And I'd show up at somebody's door, and they'd say, "Wait a second, you're the reporter on Channel 6. I'd say, "Did you order the calzone?" Yeah. Thanks for watching. I went from there to Rockford, Illinois, WREX-TV, which is an NBC affiliate. Amazing stories there. It was my first live work besides Evening Edition. It improved slightly, but was still pretty brutal. And I had some great experiences there, some bigger stories, a lot of crime in Rockford, Illinois, which is unfortunate, but actually good for a TV reporter to cover. I actually covered a series of stories about drugs and the drug effort in Rockford through my window, in my kitchen window where I lived. I shot it outside my kitchen window as the drug bust was happening next door. So it was a different time. I went from there to Raleigh, North Carolina, WRAL, a great CBS affiliate, and I stayed there for a couple of years. My first day at WRAL was a tornado in Zebulon, which is a little town, and I just happened to be nearby. We went there. It was total devastation in this trailer park. I don't know why they always hit trailer parks, but it was really sad. And while we were there, another tornado was thought to be coming that way. And so my photographer and I were running with these groups of people into a ditch, and they're saying, "Get down," and all of this is on camera, and we're getting down with the people. It didn't hit again, but it made for quite the dramatic story, as you can imagine. And I did affiliate live shots for CBS all the next day around the country. And that was my first day at WRAL. The next day, just to show you how big a powerhouse affiliate this was, I went to this little town for a follow-up story called Lizard Lick, North Carolina. Lizard Lick has one stop sign, one diner. We went into the diner, and there were about 6 big guys with big bellies at the counter. And I walked through the screen door, and they turned to me and said, "Oh, hey, Bret." I'd been there one day. So I knew this was a good place to go. From there, I started with this startup called Fox News Channel, and I became the Southeast guy. The Southeast Bureau for Fox News Channel started in my apartment with a fax machine and a cell phone. True story. And I hired freelance crews. I bounced around the Southeast and South America for 4 years, covering various stories. And this was at the beginning of Fox. So I would call somebody for an interview, and they'd say, "Fox News Channel." So wait, is that the Simpsons network? Is that what? No. Do you know Bill O'Reilly? So I knew it was sticking when I went to a school shooting in Arkansas, and we were finishing up and we were leaving. It was a tragic story. And when I was leaving Arkansas, going back to Atlanta, I was at the airport, and a little old lady came up to me and she said, "You're Bret Baier from Fox News." And I said, "Yeah, wow, I am." And she said, "I love your channel because you report and I decide." And I said, "Marketing, it's working. It's stinking in." I covered a lot of stories. Elian Gonzalez, you may remember him, the little kid. I went to Cuba 6 times. I traveled all around the Southeast, South America. I covered 14 hurricanes down there, blowing around in the middle of storms, all kinds of things. And then 9/11 happened. And I was in Atlanta. I was called up to be a backup in New York, to drive to New York. The 3rd plane hit the Pentagon, and we were rerouted to the Pentagon. And I started doing live shots outside the Pentagon that night for Fox affiliates around the country. And that started my career in Washington that night. I never left. I never went back to Atlanta. I covered the Pentagon for 5.5 years, traveled to Afghanistan 13 times and Iraq 12 times. I then went to be chief White House correspondent for 3.5 years. And I, during that time, traveled to 74 countries around the world, some of them only for a few hours, but I was there. They're push pins on a map. And I had amazing experiences over that period of time. January 5th, 2009, I took over for Brit Hume as the anchor of Special Report. Brit is my friend and mentor, a great person, and they were big shoes to fill. And it'll be 5 years this January in that seat. And it's been quite a run. Quickly, before I sit down, the first day, the transition, we transitioned to high definition, which is, as you know, now much clearer, and you can see things clearer on the screen. We decided to change up the show just a little bit, not the integrity of the show because it was a winning formula, but we wanted to see how it would look different. So we started the show with me standing up in front of a giant screen that would have a graphic behind me of the top story. And then I would do that and then sit down at the desk. Well, the first day we thought it went off perfectly without a hitch. But I get back to my desk and the computer is filled with emails with one message: "Your pants are wrinkled. You are a wrinkled mess. Brit Hume would never be this wrinkled." So I went home to my wife, Amy, and I said, "Honey, is this a problem?" And she said, "Yes. It's a real problem." And so the second day I did it again, and there were 500 emails. "This is ridiculous. Could you not just get a pressed pair of pants?" You know, all these emails. Finally, we continued, and I said, let's come up with a system. So I brought in another pair of pants. At about 5 o'clock, I changed. My assistant, Katie, then took down the suit pants that I had been wearing all day to the cleaners. They pressed them, and right before 6 o'clock, I put them on, and I stood up, and all the emails went away. everything was fine. So we did that for about a month. Well, one day I was up on Capitol Hill. I had forgotten about the whole thing because I was really busy that day. And unbeknownst to me, Katie, my assistant, had called in sick. So I had forgotten. About 5:10, I get an email from a woman whose name I don't recognize. And it has one line, and it says, "I'm ready to take your pants down now." And I looked at it for 10 minutes. Wow, that's aggressive. It was the intern sitting in for Katie, ready to take my pants down to the cleaners. We started sitting down at the desk soon thereafter. Let me end with this. DePauw has been a big part of who I am. I'm often asked, what do you tell people who want to get in this business? And I say, just keep going. I use the analogy, and I don't know where I've heard it, but I use it, that you're in a car, and you're the car, and you only have just a little bit of your headlights, but you know you're still on the road. You can still see the road, and you're driving. And you have to keep on driving, even though you can't see all the road. And then eventually you get a little bit more of your headlights, and you can see a little bit more of the road. And then sometime later you get the high beams, and you can see further. And then the sun comes up, and you can see a lot of the road. And then before you know it, you're there. And that's really how I looked at my career, is that I didn't know how I was going to get from one place to another or one spot to another, but I knew I was going to keep driving. And that's what I tell kids, is just keep driving, keep on the road, and eventually you're going to get there. The one thing that changed my life the most is my family. My son Paul was born with 5 congenital heart defects, and he had to have emergency surgery 10 days after being born. He was given a clean bill of health when he was born. He turned pale the next day, so we went from kind of the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. And he had his open heart surgery at 10 days old. The surgeon reworked the way his heart was pumping. Essentially, it was pumping exactly the wrong way. So he operated on a heart the size of a walnut and arteries the size of angel hair pasta, and reworked the way this little baby's heart worked. That changed my perspective on everything. Nothing else matters in those times. The fix was to insert a donated baby aorta. This is technical, but between his pulmonary artery and his right ventricle. And it doesn't grow with him. So he had to have another surgery at 10 months. And he had to have another surgery 3 weeks ago at 6 years old. We just made it through that, and I can tell you that he is doing fantastic. In fact, last weekend he walked a 5K for Children's National Medical Center, and the biggest problem we have now is that he has a ton of energy and he needs to calm down. I'm very blessed, but it gives you a perspective on what's important. So when I deal with Washington and all the crap that goes on in that place, sorry, it does give you a sense. There's so much more outside of that place, outside of all the talking points, outside of all the back and forth. And hopefully I bring some of that to the anchor desk, and hopefully, we'll talk about it with Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to address the audience for just a second. Bret and I are going to have a conversation for a little while and kind of talk shop in a sense, but in a little while you will get the opportunity to be the stars of the show. So if you have questions and you'd like to participate in a little while, we have microphones down near the front, so on cue, get ready to ask your questions when the time comes. Now, Bret, it was great to hear about your son Paul and his recovery and how things are going. Tell us a little bit about the staff effort to help support the Children's National Medical Center, because I know the members of your special report staff all participated in that 5K along with him.
They did, and so we had I bring the staff out once a month for these things called special report idea dinners, and we started them when I took over because I thought, you know, a lot of these guys don't make a ton of money, and it's a lot of fun to get everybody together. We started to come up with ideas to make the show better, and one of the things that they wanted to do was special report gives back, so that staff could do something in the community to make a difference. And the first thing they chose was Children's National Medical Center, without prompting from me. And so they helped set up this 5K. I think they raised $18,000 as a staff, and the whole 5K raised $700,000 for Children's National Medical Center, which is an amazing place. They do stuff for kids around the world, and they take care of everybody who comes through the door. So I was proud of the staff and, humbled by it.
Well, it's a tribute to you by your staff and to Paul as well.
Yeah,
so congratulations.
Thank you, Jeff.
Let's talk about your show a little bit. Your show is pretty much the signature hard news show for Fox News Channel. I'd be interested to know what your role is in helping set the agenda of the stories that will be covered and how much time and in what order they're going to be brought to the audience. Tell us a little bit about where you put your mark on that show, because it's called Special Report with Bret Baier.
Yeah, that's, so we have a morning meeting, every morning at 10 a.m. And we get everybody together about what is happening that day. The different correspondents who cover different beats, Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon, Ed Henry at the White House. We have James Rosen, who kind of floats around, Justice Department and other places. And we talk about the stories of the day. I am a part of that discussion. There are producers, and we have literally a batting around story ideas. It's pretty organic in the morning. I come up with what the panel is going to talk about. We discuss it, but we determine the panel topics. And a lot of it is driven by what the correspondents in the field are telling us. Having been one of those as national security correspondent and chief White House correspondent, I was really sensitive to make sure that they were being heard in those meetings. And Britt was very good about bringing us in. I'm trying to even go beyond that. So I take an active role in the formulation of the stories.
As the rundown for the show comes together, are you in a position to say, I'd rather lead with this one, or let's put this one a little lower on the roster for the agenda?
Yeah, we have that discussion every moment of every day. Most days, the whole thing changes at about 5 o'clock. It really does.
That's the news business.
Yeah, and sometimes 10 till 5, and if we're lucky. But that's a good thing, because we're giving the latest live, if we can. Just yesterday, 2 days ago, they had news conferences coming out of the White House after these meetings, and we're waiting to see if they come to the microphones or if they don't. And you have a show that you've stacked and worked on all day that goes out the window in 5 minutes if something live takes out a chunk of your show. So the biggest thing about the show is that it's time management. It is I could do 2 hours. Shepard Smith is no longer at 7. He would probably have had a problem with it. Greta's now at 7. I think she'd have a problem if we took 2 hours. But we could almost every night because, as you know, Jeff, there's just so much happening. I tell my staff it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's, it's coming at you, not just in Washington, but around the world every day.
A concern I have with the television news industry is that a lot of the news producers tend to want to get away from hard news and go into soft news or infotainment as people talk about it. Your show has resisted that. Your show is clearly a hard news show. Do you ever feel any pressure from advertisers or administrators or even the audience? They're like, hey, we need more furry animal stories or something.
No, you'd be surprised. Most people don't want the furry animal stories in their news program. They want them sometime. They like the furry animal stories. We were talking about this earlier, about ratings. They come out every afternoon at 4 p.m. So I am judged from the night before on ratings every afternoon. So on one side, that is really good because you get an instant feedback about how things worked or didn't work. On the other side, if you're in the news business and you're chasing ratings, that could be a bad thing. I mean, they have a breakdown in ratings now that it's minute by minute. So you could actually literally look at story by story to see if the audience is tuning in. We have decided on our show that's not how we're going to do it. We're going to go with the philosophy, if you build it, they will come. And they have come, and they've stayed. And we have one of the most consistent viewership platforms in the network and really in cable news. I mean, more than 2 million usually every night. And that's 2 to 3 times what CNN and MSNBC at the same hour have.
Not that anybody's comparing.
Not that I look at the ratings every day at 4 p.m., but it just happens to be fact.
Hey, and you're all about facts.
Yeah.
Talk about the audience research you get. What do you find out about your audience? What is their lifestyle like? What are their news preferences like? And how do you know that?
Yeah. That's a tough one because the audience, it's tough to get a sense of who exactly they are. Pew has done numerous studies, and they're really a good organization. They suggest that we have, on my show, a high number of independents. It's obviously a high number of Republicans, but also a pretty high number of Democrats. It's ideologically, the viewership, pretty based, pretty across the board on my show, according to Pew. They also said recently, a study that's out this week, which was interesting, that Fox News Channel viewers, 29% of them also watch MSNBC. MSNBC viewers, 38% of them also watch Fox News. Now that's not something that you get in the average breakdown of how things work. CNN's roughly the same number, about a quarter, a little bit more. But it gives you a sense that people are out there kind of flipping around. I mean, they're not just sticking with one. And I think that's encouraging because I think, not from a business perspective, but from a news perspective, that people getting news from a lot of different places is a benefit to the country.
Now, you talked about the Pew Research Center. I think they've got a lot of great research there. But a recent study they had that just came out talks about how many people in the United States, our citizenry, are not engaged in news maybe as much as they should. And also, it's probably worth noting that amongst folks in the younger generation, college age, they are not heavy news consumers.
Yeah.
Is that a problem? And how do we address that?
Yeah, it's a problem. I gave a speech at a high school recently, and I asked people, to raise their hand where they got, if they read the paper, and nobody read the paper, where they got their news from. And about half of the room got their news from Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. And, a lot of them got them from cable news, but a lot of it is just like picking it up on the internet. I think that our business will change dramatically in coming years, that it'll be much more interactive, it'll be much more online, it'll be much more catering to that generation that is not sitting watching whole programs. And that's going to change our business. And I think we're preparing for that. We're in the process of doing that, and we're actively engaged in social media and online.
As you try to cater to the current audience, but also younger generations, how do you drive them to the kinds of news of substance that they need to know about to be informed citizens and voters, as opposed to having so many young people, or even now sometimes not so young people, who think they're being informed, but they're going to the internet to check on fantasy NBA teams or the latest Miley Cyrus update? How do we get people to the point where they want news of substance, as opposed to thinking they're informed by having watched a comedy show?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question. I don't know that there's a solution yet. I think that by reaching out on Twitter, and I'm very active, interacting back and forth. We have this new thing on my show called SR Bing Pulse, where people can vote real time, live on the panel and whether they agree or disagree, and it breaks down ideologically where people are. We're working on improving like the visuals of that so it becomes more of a normal thing that people can look at. We have an online show on Wednesday nights where I have the panel and we literally take questions and comments real time from folks. If you haven't logged on Wednesday nights after the show, we all stick around and we literally react to people typing in real time with all kinds of comments, and we do that. I think that's the way. You reach out that way because that's the vehicle by which a lot of kids are communicating. And once you're in that sphere, then they find you, and you know, it's not all cotton candy. You got to eat some chicken and broccoli. And so we're going to give you a little bit inside Washington and some world news, and that's good for you. And eventually, I think that sinks in.
Could you pick up on that theme for just a little bit? Because you were talking about the broccoli's good for you. If you were to address the audience, and an audience would say, hey, I really do care more about Miley Cyrus or my NBA team than I do what's going on in Syria, or with the government shutdown, or legislation, or the Supreme Court's now in session, how do you make a convincing argument to say, this stuff is important. You really do need to be informed on the day's news and not get distracted by sideshows and circuses?
Miley Cyrus will not affect your life long term.
Really?
Jeff, I want to break it to you.
Hey, but that sledgehammer thing was pretty cool.
You know, those things are flashes in the pan. We are talking about things that could structurally change the way the U.S. operates, and it will affect you not just when you're 20, but when you're 30 and 40 and 50. When the Supreme Court weighs in on something, it is changing the country. When Syria is about to explode and the Middle East is a powder keg, those are things that could change your life dramatically. If there's a major war in the Middle East and the price of oil goes through the roof, guess what? You're not going to be able to fuel your car to get to the Miley Cyrus concert because it's going to be too pricey, and it can change the way the world operates. The biggest answer to that question is 9/11. We were in a world where we were not thinking about terrorism before that time. Then it hit, and then everybody paid attention. And now we may be forgetting a little bit, some of it. I mean, the families, obviously, of those lost don't, and the families who serve, have men and women who serve overseas and are away from their families don't. But America may, and that's why it's important, because at a flash, the whole thing can change. And if you know a little bit something about it, you're better positioned to just deal with life.
Well, and 9/11 did change our perspective on news of terrorism, but interestingly, and as you know from having been a national correspondent, in the decade before, there had been terrorist attacks around the world, including on U.S. targets like the USS Cole. Do you think maybe the news media didn't set a high enough bar for terrorism coverage for a number of years that we kind of took our eye off the ball so that when 9/11 hit, people were shocked?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think there could have been better reporting, but there could have been better warnings and talking about it from officials who steer a lot of news coverage in Washington. You know, I mean, Washington, there's a lot of enterprise reporting, there's a lot of investigative reporting, but a lot of these beats are about going to news conferences and briefings, and they're saying, here's what we know, here's what we think, and then you check that out. If the administration or different officials are not talking about those things publicly, a lot of times there's a lot of other things to cover that the media chooses to look at the shiny thing at the time.
As a Washington correspondent who covered defense and the White House, How do you break out of that mold where you let the public official set the agenda and you become the stenographer? How do you break out of that point where you can say, we want to enterprise more and not just take what the press secretary is handing out?
It is a big, big issue, and you have to do it. And that is one of the things that Jennifer Griffin has been great at the Pentagon, breaking stories outside of the spoon-fed stuff. Ed Henry has been fantastic about that, and not, and challenging, some of the line that's coming out of the White House. Sometimes covering the White House, the toughest thing to do is to get answers about what's really happening behind the scenes. So you have to go to Capitol Hill and hear what the administration officials are telling lawmakers. And really that's happening not at the White House, but on Capitol Hill. So those kinds of things. James Rosen, I mean, he's been breaking stories left and right. In fact, so much so, he was investigated by the administration. And that was a big deal. And we've forgotten about that whole chapter about going after leaks and how he was named a co-conspirator in covering this piece about North Korea. You have to break the mold, and fortunately we have amazing correspondents who are doing it.
Yeah, beyond James Rosen getting crossways with the Department of Justice investigators, the Associated Press had a lot of its reporters and phone lines tapped as well. Could you reflect for just a second on why, as audience members, we should be concerned that the government's doing surveillance on reporters?
There's a great new study out by a professional journalists organization that talks about this very issue. And it basically says there could be a chilling effect on this kind of action. And you don't want reporters of any flavor having this chilling effect to be able to squelch their ability to talk to sources around Washington. Because we, the media, provide a really crucial role to how Washington works and getting information out and making sure that sometimes what they don't want to get out still gets out. It's an important function and one that we need to protect. So those stories, while they may seem technical and kind of inside the beltway, that's why it's important, because these are things that sometimes you wouldn't hear had it not been for some enterprise reporter who had talked to 6 sources. And because now those sources are afraid to get on a phone or send an email, that reporter may not get the same information that he or she did before this effort.
Yeah, and we may be going beyond theory now too, because the president of the Associated Press just a few weeks ago gave a speech in which he said that a number of AP reporters indeed have not been able to reach sources or contacts they used to consult for news, because those sources have indeed dried up or been chilled, as you say.
I mean, when the focus was on our chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen, imagine being in the administration and getting an email from James Rosen. Yeah. It probably goes to the circular file in your, inbox. I don't, it is something that it's an issue.
Yeah. By the way, we're going to get to questions in just a couple seconds here, so if you've got some, get them ready. But I had 2 other things I wanted to bring up real quick. One was that there are some studies now that show there is a decline in credibility and trust of the American citizenry as projected toward the news media. Do you have any reasons to think why that might be? And do you have any thoughts about how we can address that? Because you obviously need a credible news media to serve that function that the media serves.
Yeah, listen, people meld opinion and news together. And they think about sometimes that it's just one animal. My channel is a perfect example. If there are people who hate Fox News Channel, I will talk to them. Most of them have never seen my show. If anything, they've seen a clip of O'Reilly or Hannity on Ed Schultz or Rachel Maddow or Jon Stewart. And so I'll talk to them. And the most visceral haters of Fox News will be, I'll say, have you watched Fox News Channel? And they'll say no. And I'll say, well, could you give it 3 days watch my show for 3 days, watch Shepard Smith's show for 3 days, and come back to me, and then let me know what you think. Most of those people, if they're honest, will come back and say, you know, and I've had this happen, you're right, you handled that fairly, but I have a problem with this or this, but you mostly were fair. And if I can get mostly you were fair, that's a good day. But I do think the problem, Jeff, is that there is this conflation, there's this kind of melding of opinion and news, and Rachel Maddow is not, you know, Brian Williams. And believe me, Brian Williams wants you to know that. I am not Sean Hannity, and I want you to know that. And so there needs to be a separation in the mindset that there is a news section and opinion section, just like a newspaper has a news section and an opinion section. And hopefully we can get that through. It is something that we have, I think studies show on our show, managed to get through. If you build it, they will come.
So this might be a challenge for your marketing department.
Yeah, exactly.
To say, hey, make sure that people understand the distinction. Well, I mean, newspapers for years have had an opinion section and the news section, and people know they read opinion sections in the newspaper. That doesn't necessarily represent what's on the front page, but that's something you can take back to your marketing.
Yeah, well, I will. And, you know, people have ripped on fair and balanced, you know, because it's been out there since the beginning. And I've seen Jon Stewart go to town, and he puts, you know, Hannity or somebody on there. And it is literally what I'm trying to do when I get to that morning meeting. And so I speak from my show. And I'm trying to do that every day.
Well, you talked about fair and balanced as a slogan, but I remember once seeing Bret Baier, your mentor, in an interview, and he said once, you know, fairness is a skill, and that reporters who want to be fair should learn the techniques to arrive at fairness. And I think that that's something your show, I know, tries to do very hard.
Thank you. We do.
Speaking of your show, I know one aspect of your show that a lot of your fans really enjoy is when you have your panel discussion toward the end of your show, sometimes 15, 20 minutes. And not everybody knows necessarily that Stephen Hayes, who's one of your panelist guests from time to time, is also a DePauw alum.
By the way, he's on the panel so much because he has too many stories about me. He was a Sigma Chi as well.
So we need to get him in this chair sometime to ask about those stories.
Maybe not.
Okay. Anyway, talk a little bit about how you referee that panel, because that strikes me as a very tough job. You've got some very strong opinion makers there. You've got people who disagree on various issues. You've got, of course, extract their opinions out, but not allow, you know, open combat there. So talk about how you manage that.
It's one of the great things about the show in that is most of those people have covered Washington for at least a decade, sometimes decades, and have such knowledge, an analytical ability to know where all sides are. And to be able to break through. Charles Krauthammer is a great friend of mine. He is brilliant. And no matter your ideology, I think you have to admit that he speaks in verbal op-eds. Those panel segments are organic. I give them the topic, but I don't give them the questions. This is a conversation that is happening at the time. So when you see Charles or George Will now, or Juan Williams, or Mara Eliason speaking, it is all off the cuff. It is what they're saying real time to this conversation. Now, they may have come in, you know, like horses at a gate, ready to go with something, but it is really a conversation. So what I'm trying to do is elicit their analytical observations about the stories of the day. And if I can do that in a peaceful way, without people getting on each other and talking over each other, I think that is a value, because too much of TV is about yelling and talking over each other. And if you can have analytical observations, respect them, disagree with them, press them, but then have kind of a dynamic. I think we've captured, a genie in a jar there. I think the panel works well.
Great. Ready for some questions
of
from
course.
the audience?
Love it.
People in the audience, I would welcome you down to the microphones in front. And while you're approaching the microphone, I just have to ask this. You said you covered a lot of hurricanes when you were in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Were you one of those guys who stood out in the gale-force winds and said, "It's terrible, don't come out here"?
Yes. Yes, I was. It's not a proud moment, Jeff.
I just had to ask.
But I was blowing around many times in a blue slicker, and yeah, I was blowing around. The cameraman was in the back of a van often, kind of protected, and I was kind of seeing stop signs fly by. Whatever you do, don't come out here. Yeah.
You made it, though.
Yeah. And don't surf.
Questions?
I've had class with Professor McCall numerous times, but one of the things that we learned...
I'm sorry.
One of the things that we learned is that people who consume media, whatever it might be, they tend to learn to, or they acquire this trust and this emotional connection with newscasters that they've never even met. So my question is, what are some of the things that you do or some of your colleagues do in order to, I guess, present yourselves as a credible and trustworthy newscaster?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you just have to have your product speak for you and back it up. And if we make a mistake, we say we made a mistake. We correct it as fast as we can. Establish that trust factor. Expose some of yourself occasionally, and be personable. You're right about the emotional connection. It does happen. I've been around the country where people talk to me like I'm a family member because I'm in their living room every evening. And it is a personal thing, which is why at the end of the show I say, thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. Because it is an invitation, and you are accepting it by having me in your living room. And it's a personal thing. Some people have write in, "You're in my bedroom." I'm like, let's keep it there. And I've had other people say, "Do you know my uncle's friend Bobby? You look really familiar," and people think I'm somehow part of the family. It's personal, and we get it, and so we value that, and establishing that relationship is important. How are you?
Good.
What's your name?
Kevin.
Kevin, nice to meet you.
Who's the most interesting person you've ever interviewed?
That is a great question, Kevin. How old are you?
12.
It might be you. Let me keep asking. A great question, Kevin. I have interviewed many, many people. I think some of the most interesting have been in the field overseas, service members who are fighting along the Afghan-Pakistan border. I was with Special Ops Forces who were fighting the Al-Qaeda along the gorges between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and talking to some of them. I remember one time, Kevin, I came to a forward operating base in Afghanistan after being out with the special forces, and I came back to this computer room, and the guy next to me, I was filing a story for Fox, and the guy next to me, this was at the early part of Skype where you could talk real time, he was meeting his baby for the first time on the computer. And so those moments are really important for me to help tell the story of the service and sacrifice of U.S. service members. So those are the most important. The most interesting, I might have to say, Jimmy Buffett in Cuba. I happened to be in Cuba covering something else, and he was there on a music thing, and I asked him for an interview, and we were doing the interview over the Malecón in Havana, and it was just kind of surreal. I had a margarita afterwards. But you don't need to hear that, Kevin. But thank you for the question. After you.
You know, Bret, I feel a little bit of affinity to you because I'm a '69 graduate of DePauw, and my fraternity father was your father.
How about that? That's great.
So if you want some real stories,
so we're related.
Well, no, I could tell you the real side of Bill Baier.
Oh,
what he's
dear.
like, what he's all about. My question to you would be, in terms of when you're giving your newscast, how hard is it for you to not let your own personal opinion affect something in terms of an issue that's being, because you mentioned about MSNBC and all those other reporters who are very, very slanted, as you well know. How hard is it for you not to give your opinion in terms of what you think a certain issue, how it should be?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think, listen, I'm not a robot. I have my own thoughts. I have my own thinking about things. But it's my job in this position to keep those opinions to myself and to try to elicit and steer conversation and reporting that is fair. There are times that you'd be surprised what I think. It doesn't fall in the normal breakdown of what the stereotype may be. And but all of those opinions, I try, I'm not an opinion guy. So I try my hardest to keep those out of my questioning and out of our reporting. But obviously I have them. And that's always a challenge for news people.
If I can get a few drinks if you have it.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll tell you stories, but
Okay. Professor Steinberg,
Hi, Bret.
how are you? We saw each other in Iowa. Was it last cycle?
2012, yes.
That's right.
Yes, and you were very kind to get someone to take a photo of the two of
That's
us,
right.
you may recall.
Yeah.
And I tell my students that story, Bret, that so you commandeered somebody who was following you around, not following me, and they took a photo and you looked at it and you said, that's not very good, let's have them take it again.
Yeah.
I was very impressed by your photographic expertise, as well as other things. I have a question, building on your conversation with Jeff about James Rosen and AP wiretapping. I want to broaden that, or I think broaden it, to the likes of Private Manning, Edward Snowden, Aaron Swartz, who were linked together in a recent Time magazine cover story, you may recall. So it's not so much a question. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the way the government has pursued those three people, what you think of those three people's motives and operations. You know that Edward Snowden in particular says that I released this stuff because I thought the public needed to know. And then more generally, I wondered, how professional journalists, if you can speak for professional journalists as a whole, whether they see the kind of pursuit of those three people and the activities in which they engaged, how that might intimidate or concern professional journalists. So it's I'd just like to hear your thoughts on those three people and what happened.
I mean, those are big stories. They're getting ready to release this movie about WikiLeaks, and that's a huge story as well. I think that, a lot of people in Washington come from the perspective, Bruce, that we wouldn't have known any of that without these guys, but they broke the law and they signed a pledge not to do what they did. So covering that is always a challenge, to be able to point those two things out, and specifically that they signed on and swore an allegiance that they were not going to do this, and they did. And from a government perspective, you can't have secrets, you can't have people handling top classified information if that's going to be the norm. So that has to be a part of the story. But the other thing is that we wouldn't have known a lot of the things we know about what the NSA and the government was doing without what Edward Snowden did. All of these stories that are coming out of the New York Times and Washington Post and all of this stuff about what the NSA has and is doing, we just wouldn't know. I mean, no matter the most enterprising reporter wouldn't be able to get that deep. So, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We know more. Is the country safer because of it? Probably not. And you're right, the pursuit of those guys adds to the James Rosens and the APs and the chilling effect. But from a government perspective, you also have to cover the fact that it's against the law. It's a tough question, because I think There's a lot that the NSA does that we're just learning about that a lot of people have a problem with. But inside Washington, when they make the case, we're safer because of what they do. And you don't want to know all the things they do to stop terrorist attacks. That's part of the story too. So it's complex. And I know I didn't answer it effectively.
I know I'm going back to a question that was previously discussed a little bit, but first I want to thank you for attempting to have a news program that is unopinionated and keeping.
And clearly we have opinions. At the end of the panel, there's opinions, but we try.
Is there? My understanding is, in reporting the news when I was in college, was that ethically you were required, unless you were on an opinion show, to deliver hard news without any kind of bias. And I was just wondering if this shift in delivering opinionated news is driven by the people who are reporting the news, by sponsors, or if you think that the opinion of that has changed, as opposed in terms of how you're supposed to report what is going on in the world.
Yeah. And that's a tough question too, in that, when you just had 3 networks, you had kind of a myopic view of that's the 3 networks that there were. And 60 million plus people used to watch all 3 networks. Now it's broken down across many networks. Fox, when it started, had a niche in that Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch believed that there was a whole uncovered segment of the population, that conservatives and Republicans were not being given a fair shake, at least equal time, on those 3 networks. And the fair and balanced segment came out of this need, they thought, to deal with what they perceived was a lot of bias in the 3 networks, in kind of just covering it the same way. There are many stories that we choose to do that other networks don't do. I mean, we did the Gosnell murder trial of this Philadelphia doctor in about abortions. No one was covering that story. Not one network, not even local TV, like a few in Philadelphia, but they weren't. So we covered it. That's a choice of coverage. Now, why wasn't that being covered on the major 3 networks? Until we started to cover it, it got a little bit more attention and it became a national story. There are many examples of that. It's choices in coverage, not just how things are delivered. It's what you choose to cover. So that's how I look at it, is that I think that you need to say whether you're an opinion show or a news show. I agree. But people also need to know that every show has some kind of take on things. Well, it's not pure. And as much as we try, journalists try, there are other factors that are involved in a lot of things that at other networks that factor into how they cover things and how the choices of stories that they choose.
It never seemed to be this way before. That's why I'm asking. I mean, there seems to have been a shift.
There may have been. I mean, maybe it's some part of ratings. Maybe it's some part of, a number of things. There's a business side to this too. I can tell you from my show, I go in every day and we're trying to be fair. And that's how I have to look at the world. I can't look at anybody else's show. I have to look at mine. But I can tell you that was the thinking at the beginning of Fox News Channel, was that there was a need to provide balance overall.
And the Gosnell thing did get some traction in media outside of Fox News after a time, and you did a special report on that.
I did, an hour special. By the way, I mean, that's what I aspire to do, is many more hour specials. Because with an hour on one topic, you can really dig into something. And it provides you much more than just the soundbite, the 30-second soundbite. It provides you the ability to get in and do something long form. The next hour we have is about Charles Krauthammer. It is his life. I've spent the past 6 months doing interviews, behind the scenes. He has a book coming out October 22nd. And I don't know when it's going to air. I think it's going to air the weekend after the book comes out. But it is really spectacular, I think, because you see a side of Charles that you have not seen. And it's worth watching. And I think it'll be something that gets a lot of attention.
What kind of ratings and feedback do you get on those special 1-hour broadcasts?
We get a lot of feedback, a ton of feedback, that people want more of that kind of journalism because people can dig in and they can get their head around a lot of stuff. The ratings are good. They're not fantastic through the roof, but they're good.
But it's a throwback kind of broadcast to the days of Edward R. Murrow.
And I'm all for it.
Good. Let's have some more questions.
Brett, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you coming out here and spending your time with us. But my question is, in a environment that kind of promotes more of a pro wrestling style of debate, where you have your shows that are mostly opinionated, we have a topic, the left guy, the guy from the left screams, the guy from the right screams, the guy in the middle who's hosted gives his opinion, and then they move on to the next topic. At your station, at your channel, you talked about, it used to be you had the news and then you have your opinion. Well, in the newspaper, the newspaper is 95% news and 5% opinion, where on television it's the reverse. At least that's what it seems. When you're talking about people who don't necessarily watch Fox, I think in general, it's not the 2 hours of yourself and Shepard Smith that people view Fox News. It's the other 22 hours.
Yeah, which is why I say I can speak for my hour.
Exactly.
And
so my question,
I'm defending the network because it's a choice that each show makes.
Sure.
But when I speak about what I do, it's from my perspective.
My question is, what's the fight that you have in order to make your view and your show, what you feel is right, the popular opinion, and not just with your station, because it's like that in other stations too. What's the fight that you have to make yours the overwhelming opinion, which, in essence is going to benefit the public more? And then a second question is, what do you feel the role of, private financing is having an effect on not just the news and journalism, but also the electorate in terms of funding candidates and how they shape their opinions and, how, the voters view your, the way you carry your news coverage?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess the fight that I have to make is that differential and fight for my show. I went on Jon Stewart's show. I did feel like a piece of meat in a lion's den. But I went on, and, we had a great back and forth, I think. He said that I was the anchor that they threw out when they were talking about fairness. And how did I feel about that? I feel pretty good about it, actually. And I use my show as, I hope, a place where people could come and get news. Like I said, the decisions of other shows and how they do things is not, my deal. On the money part, a lot of people are concerned about, how much money plays into news and top-down organization. I can tell you this. In my organization, when I'm having that morning meeting, the phone is not ringing and Rupert Murdoch's on the other line saying, "You've got to cover this." Yeah, he's not. And neither is Roger Ailes. My organization, when we're doing it, is really a lot bottom up from correspondence and stories that are generated in the Washington Bureau. Now, I don't know how that is at other organizations, how much corporate synergy factors into stories. There have been many different examples of that where it's been revealed that it's come out, but my experience with Fox has not been that. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering how you think the new president in Iran is going to change, since he's going to reform Iran to a moderate country, you think back, we had the same relations with China back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then Nixon.
Well, first of all, what's your name?
Jackson.
Jackson. Oh, Jackson, sure. That's a fantastic question.
And then we have the same, when we have better relations with China now since we, we're think how you're going to do it for Iran.
Yeah. Jackson, by the way, is 13, is that right? That's a pretty good question for Jackson. Thank you for that. I think that the new Iranian president, Jackson, is going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how the U.S. Tries to deal with them. Right now, they're reaching out and they're trying to talk. They've had this phone call. There's more plans to reach out. But there's, in the administration, a lot of skepticism about Iran's true motives. But the second part of your question about China is really interesting because China is making a huge move around the world economically. And they understand they have their own internal problems. They are trying to deal with a population that's exploding. They're creating about 15 mega cities of 50 million plus each. They're trying to get their rural population to become urban. And imagine Obamacare in that realm. Imagine trying to provide health care or anything to that many people in big cities that are just being built. So China has its own internal problems, but they're trying to make a play around the world. And you're right to ask about all of those global synergies. I think that Iran is going to try to seem like they're negotiating, but maybe still doing the stuff that they were doing, which is spinning centrifuges to try to get enough enriched uranium to build a bomb, and once you have it, the world then looks at you differently. But great question. Yes, sir.
As a fellow DePauw, soon-to-be alum, assuming classes go well, you and I will hold the same degree that a Nobel Prize winner holds, and one of my friends who's currently working at Starbucks. You mentioned earlier the reference of a car trip. What bags did you pack? What bags did you leave at home that made you successful on your trip?
Oh, that's great. Good question. It was just literally me. I decided that was going to be it. Whatever it took, I was going to go to the next spot. Now, I had the benefit of being single at the time. There are people who are married with children, that this becomes a much different road. And the headlights are a lot different because you got to look out for a number of other people in the car. And so the benefit of my youth was that I could just drive, and I didn't bring a lot with me. I, in those early days, ate a lot of ramen noodles, saltines and ketchup, and didn't mind making $15,000 a year. So what I guess the baggage I put to the side was, I'm not going to worry about money at this point. It's a tough thing in this environment, in this day and age, to be able to do that. And I hope that you can still do it the way I did it, which is bounce around small market TV. I think you can. But when you do have a family, Jack McCwethy, who was a great friend of mine, before he passed, we were on a trip overseas, said, if you can hang your trench coat at the door with your job when you go home, that's what you got to strive to do every day. It's becoming tougher and tougher to do, but one of the things you have to get in your head if you have a family is that time has to be sacred. And Twitter and Facebook and everything else needs to go to the side. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you, and welcome back.
Thanh you.
Hello. Just a quick question. With the idea of the government being corrupt today and cover-ups like the IRS, how do you go upon these situations to attempt to get the purest information delivered to the public?
I mean, it's tough. It's tough. I mean, in Washington, it's a place where they spin. Every side has an angle, and you're trying to figure out what's behind what they're saying, 3 steps. So it's kind of like 3-dimensional chess. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts that have ulterior motives. We trust that some of these investigations are going to be fruitful, and they're going to tell us, what's coming out of things, and then you just have to keep on digging. And reporters that you trust have to keep on asking tough questions. So thank you.
I think we have time for the last 2 people who
Okay.
are waiting, so let's
Yes, sir.
deal with them and we'll move on.
Yes, you alluded to it a little bit earlier about, well, you said you didn't really know whether ownership of stations or networks had much to do with the opinions that were expressed, but it seems
No, the news part of the deal. Clearly, clearly Fox is a conservative station when it comes to opinion programs. I mean, nobody's going to tell you that Hannity's a liberal, and something tells me that the owner of MSNBC is not thinking that he has a conservative brand. I mean, because Rachel Maddow and Ed Schultz and all that. So clearly on the opinion side, that has a definite effect. What I was talking about was on the news program, I'm not getting the call from Rupert Murdoch or Roger Ailes.
All right. Well, my question is, because the American population depends so much on the media for their input, their information, their thoughts, their direction, it seems like things have gotten very much skewed, or they were. Rupert Murdoch decided, well, we needed something to make it more fair and balanced. How do you think that things got so skewed or so far off? Or how
People were making money.
So money.
I mean, it was a business deal. And things started happening, and MSNBC saw how successful the opinion programs on Fox were, and they said, well, there's got to be another brand on opinion on the other side, and they were right. There was a market for them. Listen, I'm not saying that 24-hour talk is helpful for the governing of the country. I mean, I think if you talk to lawmakers up on Capitol Hill, they'll tell you they get bombarded from all sides, and it makes their job of governing that much tougher. I also think in this environment of Twitter, where things are debated in an instant, governing a country, you could make a decision and the world has already weighed in on your decision before you've actually pulled the trigger to make it. That's how fast things are moving. So governing and lawmaking in that environment becomes increasingly tough. And the loudest folks are often the folks on either side the furthest away from the center. Often the quietest are the most moderate. I mean, our election process has Iowa and New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada in the first 4. Now, I mean, is that representative? Do the moderate voices really speak out in the primary system? I think most candidates play to their base, and then in a general election, they play to the middle. And that's how it's gone. Now, will that change is the question. I do think that the country is almost ready for a pendulum. Like the pendulum, I think that everybody I talk to is just so sick of Washington. I mean, I don't care your politics, your ideology, they're just sick of Washington, period. Throw them all out is what I hear at diners around the country. Start over. Term limits is something that I hear more and more. Get them out of there. And I think, this is me expressing an opinion off the record, that the country...
Into your microphone.
Yeah, is this thing on? Yeah. That the country probably will have a moment where the pendulum swings. It always has, if you look back at history. It's cyclical. And I think that a moderate, middle-type candidate may be an attractive future candidate. I don't know if it's this election or next election, but at some election, there will be a moment where the country swings to the middle. Now, all your recording devices were off, and no, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Our last questioner.
Thank you so much for being here, and excuse me for reading. You mentioned that you present fact-based news with the mentality that if you build it, they will come. Al Jazeera recently hit the U.S. with the slogan, fact-based, in-depth news, promising an entire station dedicated to unbiased news. There was a recent report a few days ago that they were given a 0 rating, capturing only a few thousand viewers. Do you think that the American people want fact-based news?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they have a unique issue. They have an international brand that is not the same as their U.S. channel, and so they have a branding issue currently. I know a lot of people who work there. They're good people. Soledad O'Brien, Ali Velshi, Tony Harris, a lot of CNN folks. I don't know if it'll take off. They also don't have a lot of distribution from the Al Gore deal. He wasn't in a lot of places with current TV. So they have their own issues as a business. That said, I do think that there's a hunger for news. I mean, I really do. And while, yes, the opinion shows do great, and they are great business models, and you clearly can get the ratings, I do think that there's a hunger for at least one oasis of something where you say, well, that was fair. Or, yeah, I got that. Or, he gave them a fair shake. I think that there's a hunger, and I hope so, because that's what I'm trying to do. So, thank you for the question.
I have 2 housekeeping announcements for everybody. At 11:40, our head football coach, Bill Lynch, will be at the Old Gold Tailgate to talk about the game strategy as we beat Oberlin this afternoon. And also, don't forget, the football game at 1 o'clock today will feature a really exciting event because the field is going to be dedicated to Coach Nick Morosis, the legendary DePauw football coach. I hope you can make both of those events.
Let me just say one more thing. DePauw is a big part of who I am. It's a big part of who I became. And I really like coming back here. And it's an honor to be here on this day, Old Gold Weekend. And Nick Morosis, God, he's a hero of mine. He's just an amazing guy. So I'm really happy to see that stadium. And it's good to be back. So thanks for having me.
Bret.